So let's get underway. If you take small children to a public park, the first thing they will want to do is to climb a ladder, a climbing wall, the monkey bars, or any accessible tree is irresistible to the child. They want to climb. There's an inherent desire in the human heart to ascend. This is what comes naturally. The majestic ascent of human consciousness towards spiritual enlightenment has been favorably compared to mountain climbing. In 2017, one of the most remarkable climbs in the history of climbing was performed, the free solo ascent of El Capitan in Yosemite's National Park.
If you're free soloing, it is about perfect execution or certain death.
Hello, I'm Chai Vassarelli. I'm a documentarian.
My name is Jimmy Chin, and I'm a National Geographic photographer and filmmaker.
We made Free Solo together.
And we are going to talk a little bit about how we captured the first free solo ascent of El Capitan. The thing about El Cap is that it is huge. It's 3,000 feet tall, and it's almost hard for the mind to comprehend. The idea of climbing it without a rope was just really beyond most people's imagination. Alex chose freerider on El Cap because even as a professional climber, if you are to be able to climb freerider, what we call clean, which is without falling, that would be a lifetime achievement. I think Alex was certainly the first person to consider it seriously.
Well, we were always more interested in Alex as a character study than as a free soloist per se. I mean, Alex began free soloing because as a kid, it was scarier for him to speak to another person and ask them to be his partner than to go out by himself and without a partner and hence without a rope. It was
Does it feel different to be up there without a rope?
It's obviously like much higher consequence.
People who know a little bit about climbing, they're like, oh, he's totally safe. And then people who really know exactly what he's doing are freaked out.
I've thought about El Cap like for years, and every year I'm like, that's really scary. I'll never be content unless I at least put in the effort. El Cap is the most impressive wall on Earth.
It's 3,200 feet of sheer granite. It's the center of the rock climbing universe.
Obviously I get interview questions about it all the time. Oh, would you like to do that? And you're like, yes, for sure.
So you have a girlfriend now, I heard.
It was awesome. Pretty much makes life better in every way.
It's really hard for me to grasp why he wants this. But if he doesn't do this stuff, he'd regret it.
Everybody who has made free soloing a big part of their life is dead now.
I haven't been injured in like 7 years. I suddenly start getting injured all the time.
What if something happens? What if I don't see him again?
I could just walk away, but it's like, I don't want to.
I've always been conflicted about shooting a film about free soloing just because it's so dangerous. It's hard to not imagine your friend falling through the frame to his death.
I think when he's free soloing, that's when he feels the most alive, most everything. How can you even think about taking it away from somebody?
No mistakes tomorrow.
Starting to get kind of psyched.
If you're pushing the edge, eventually you find the edge.
I can't believe you guys are actually gonna watch. Hey Jimmy, do you copy? Just started climbing.
The concentration, the commitment, the fearlessness and devotion necessary to climb the world's most difficult mountain peaks provides us with a small glimpse of the far more challenging quest of mastering the mind.
If you're free soloing,
the great teachers of the human race who have traversed these routes before us provide us with maps and encouragement that we too might climb.
From Shankara's Viveka Chudamani, crest jewel of wisdom. Shanta Mahanto Nivasanti Santo Vasanta Vallokahitam Charantaha Tirnaha Swayam Bhima Bhavarnavam Janan Ahetunan Yanati Tarayantaha Ayam Swabhavaha Swata Eva Yatpara Shramapanoda Pravanam Mahatmanam Sudham Shuresha Swayamarka Karkasha Prabhabhitaptamavati Kshitim Kila. The great and peaceful ones live regenerating the world like the coming of spring. Having crossed the ocean of embodied existence themselves, they freely aid all others who seek to cross it. The very essence and inherent will of Mahatmas is to remove the sufferings of others, just as the ambrosia rayed moon cools the earth heated by the intense rays of the sun.
What would it be like to experience a human life from the vantage point of the immortal soul? What is the vista like from that mountain peak? What training and preparation are necessary for the climb? How does one manage the fear of letting go of the lesser self? What stamina is necessary to persist in the quest for the summit of human consciousness? What stands in our way, blocking passage? And even more importantly, what is the quality of heart necessary to undertake the ascent?
From the Bhagavad Gita, as a man throweth away old garments and putteth on new, even so the dweller in the body, having quitted its old mortal frames, entereth into others which are new. The weapon divideth it not, the fire burneth it not, the water corrupteth it not, the wind drieth it not away. For it is indivisible, inconsumable, incorruptible, and is not to be dried away. It is eternal, universal, permanent, immovable. It is invisible, inconceivable, and unalterable. Therefore, knowing it to be thus, thou shouldst not grieve.
Continuity of consciousness is Olympian in scale. It is the vantage point of the Sutratman, the thread soul that spans the ages from life to life. And no matter how impoverished in heart and mind one finds themselves, the sages teach that it is possible to build within the privacy of one's consciousness a sanctuary that no weapon can penetrate, no fire burn, no water corrode, or wind affect. But we must be willing to climb. We must ascend to this continuity, this wholeness. It does not descend to us. The grand pilgrimage of humanity, the spiritual quest of the Theosophical student, could be characterized as an incremental process of reestablishing continuity of consciousness, the unbroken mental posture of the immortal soul. Like the hands and feet of the climber, two of the most vital tools of ascension are meditation and self-study.
From Emerson's essay, The Oversoul. We live in succession, in division, in parts, in particles. Meanwhile, within man is the soul of the whole, the wise silence, the universal beauty to which every part and particle is equally related, the eternal one. And this deep power in which we exist, and whose beatitude is all accessible to us, is not only self-sufficing and perfect in every hour, but the act of seeing and the thing seen, the seer and the spectacle, the subject and the object are one. We see the world piece by piece, as the sun, the moon, the animal, the tree, but the whole of which these are the shining parts is the soul.
The idea of continuity of consciousness is rooted in the very fabric of the universe. The cosmos is fundamentally one whole, and great teachers tell us this whole is mirrored within the soul of man. Behind and within all of manifestation lies a radical unity. Call it divinity, call it Tao, call it Brahma, call it Allah, call it God if you must, but whatever you might call it, remember that it is everywhere and nowhere in particular. It is all time and no particular moment. In other words, there is a continuity and a connectivity from the highest to the lowest, from the closest to the furthest, from the abstract to the concrete. There is a relation between the Milky Way and a firefly. There is a connection between the breathing of the cosmos, which is the cycles of the manvantaras and pralayas, and the exhaltation and inhalation of an infant. This living, breathing whole is the source of continuity of consciousness. Put in meta-psychological terms, we might call it the one self, or the self of all. The Jedi Knight might call it the Force, but then again, if the Jedi Knight really knew the Force in Theosophical terms, there would be no need for fighting.
From the Hermes article, Reincarnation and Silence. For the personal consciousness, there can be no immortality, while for the indwelling soul, for the individual ray of the overbrooding Atman, immortality is a fact. For the mediating mind of the middle, immortality has to be won, to be earned, and is neither a gift nor a fact. The mind must progressively detach itself from its external vestures, like a musician who goes beyond worship of his instrument, or of his fingers moving on the instrument, or of his own self-image, and is merged into something beyond all recorded music, into a reverence for the inaudible music of the spheres.
The Theosophical teaching is that man is sevenfold, but it is also useful to see ourselves in a triune way as body, soul, and spirit. We could correlate spirit with the Atman, body with the personality, and soul as the meditating mind in the middle. It is in the middle where Arjuna resides, poised between two great armies. Let us draw our attention to three key ideas necessary for acquiring continuity of consciousness, depth in meditation, and profundity in self-study. The first idea that I wanted to bring your attention to is concentration. To exercise the powers inherent in the mind, we must cultivate the capacity to concentrate. The ability to place the mind on a single idea or topic without deviation or interruption gradually gives rise to a laser-like power to penetrate and unite. The power of one-pointedness is the relaxed concentration of the yogi. Patanjali makes it clear in his Yoga Sutras that the recurrent problem is in the management of the mind is fragmentation and distraction. Continuity is elusive. The monkey mind, as the Buddhists love to say, keeps jumping from subject to subject, desire to desire, topic to topic, experience to experience, with little room provided for focus. No climber can ascend without giving their full attention to each handhold, each foothold. For a free solo ascent, like Alex Honnold's El Capitan climb, Inattention spells death. Watch this video and ask yourself what level of concentration would be necessary to do what he is doing. Watch the deliberateness to which he places his hands and feet, each finger even.
I mean, to have the slabs and the boulder problem behind him is monumental.
Here's the Enduro, huh?
Yeah, this is the Enduro. I can't believe you guys actually can watch. Oh, I don't want to, I don't.
What are they? What are they?
God.
Yeah, that's kind of exposed right there.
Oh my god, it's so exposed. That arret move as he stepped around has got to be, I mean, that's like one of the most exposed moves like anywhere on El Cap. You just step out, it all drops away.
Alex is having the best day of his life.
I don't know. Not me. I'm done. I'm done. Yeah, no, this is it. We don't need to do this again.
I've watched that video probably 30 or 40 times and my hands sweat every time I watch it. His life is literally dependent upon every move he makes on the mountain. Remember, he's over 2,000 feet above the ground. Alex trained himself assiduously over 20 years to push aside the natural fear any human being might feel at these heights and to remain calm and concentrated while on these giant walls. He's performing a feat even the top climbers considered impossible. Notice the calmness in his performance. Nothing is rushed. He is not a daredevil. His nickname is No Big Deal. In interviews, he said that if he gets excited, something is going terribly wrong. He said that if 10 is an adrenaline rush and 0 is being asleep, he tries to climb at 4.
From Robert Crosby's Culture of Concentration. We need to know about our minds, and we need to control our minds, that is, the lower mind, occupied with personal and physical things, known in Theosophical phraseology as lower manas. It is this internal organ, the thinking principle, which the ancients said is the great producer of illusion, the great distractor of concentration. For there is no possibility of obtaining real concentration until the possessor of the mind can place it where he will, when he will, and for as long a time as he pleases.
So the second idea that I'd like to bring to your attention for our topic today is the idea of critical distance. Call it detachment, if you will. The first and often overlooked chapter of the Bhagavad Gita concerns Arjuna's request of Krishna to drive his chariot between the two armies on the battlefield. This is emblematic of critical distance. Before Arjuna can receive the teachings, perspective is needed. To gain perspective, Arjuna must momentarily step aside from the battle. Critical distance is the minimum level of detachment needed to allow clarity of vision. Both meditation and self-study necessitate the effort to set aside the personality temporarily and assume the posture of the immortal soul, which resides outside of space and time. How does one establish some level of critical distance? The honored practice of neti-neti can be very helpful here. Neti-neti means not this, not that. I am not my body. I am not my name. I am not my job. I am not the project I'm working on. I'm not my personal history. I'm not the roles I play. I'm not the resident of this town, state, or country. I'm not the language that I'm using, etc., etc. Why? Because for over countless millennia, the thread soul has lived many lives in many places, played many roles, and collected thousands of experiences. Draw together all the things we typically identify with and set them aside. Systematically disassociate oneself from all that is not immortal. Put the personality in a box for safekeeping. Then take it back out for honest evaluation when the time is right. Perspective is precious.
The third idea, and perhaps the most important, is devotion. From the Secret Doctrine. When moved by the law of evolution, the Lords of Wisdom infused into him the spark of consciousness. The first feeling it awoke to life and activity was a sense of solidarity, of oneness with the spiritual creators. As the child's first feeling is for its mother and nurse, so the first aspirations of the awakening consciousness in primitive man were for those whose element he felt within himself, and who yet were outside and independent of him. Devotion arose out of that feeling and became the first and foremost motor in his nature, for it is the only one which is natural in our heart, which is innate in us, and which we find alike in human babe and the young of the animal.
Devotion is the motor power of the mortal soul. What would it mean to fan the fires of devotion in the heart? Devotion is rooted in gratitude. Gratitude to one's parents. Gratitude for one's teachers. Gratitude to the teachers of our teachers, the Mahatmas. Gratitude to the Mother Earth and Brother Sun. And gratitude for the source of life, light, and energy we feel within us. Reflection on these continuities spurs devotion. If devotion is what is most natural in the human heart, we must stop to ask, what is blocking it? Devotion, like all other qualities, comes in degrees. Many of the elite climbers who know Alex Honnold say he has a superpower. He's exquisitely calm at great heights and challenging predicaments. But it is his total devotion to climbing and dedication to his craft that is his real superpower that he possesses. Consider these words from George William Russell's Candle of Vision.
From the candle of vision, I followed a path all may travel, but on which few do journey. None need special gifts of genius. Gifts, there are no gifts. For all that is ours, we have paid the price. There is nothing we aspire to for which we cannot barter some spiritual merchandise of our own. Powers are not bestowed by caprice on any. Day after day, at times when none might interfere, and where none through love or other cause were allowed to interfere, I set myself to attain mastery over the will. I would choose some mental object, an abstraction of form, and strive to hold my mind fixed on it, unwavering concentration, so that not for a moment, not for an instant, would the concentration slacken. It is an exercise, this, a training for higher adventures of the soul. It is no light labor. It is then we realize how little of life has been our own, and how much a response to sensation, a drifting on the tide of desire. Empires do not send legions so swiftly to frustrate revolt as all that is mortal in us hurries along nerve, artery, and every highway of the body to beset the soul. The beautiful face of one we love, more alluring than life, glows before us to enchant us from our task. Old sins, enmities, vanities, and desires beleaguer and beseech us.
Our turning inwards and our fledgling steps at self-mastery bring an unavoidable struggle, reminiscent of the most difficult routes of a climbing adventure. There's a struggle between the mountain and the climber's muscles and skill. There's a tempest stirring between the separative ego and the unified individuality. If there is no struggle, it is because we are not climbing.
From the candle of vision, the heat of this fervent concentration acts like fire under a pot, and everything in our being boils up madly. We learn our own hitherto unknown character. We did not know we could feel such fierce desires, never imagined such passionate enmities as now awaken. But the ancients who taught us to gain this intensity taught it but as preliminary to a meditation which would not waver and would be full of power. The meditation they urged on us has been explained as the inexpressible yearning of the inner man to go out into the infinite. But that infinite we would enter is living. It is the ultimate being of us. Meditation is a fiery brooding on that majestic self. We imagine ourselves into its vastness. We conceive ourselves as mirroring its infinitudes, as moving in all things, as living in all beings, in earth, water, air, fire, ether. We try to know as it knows, to live as it lives, to be compassionate as it is compassionate. We equal ourselves to it that we may understand it and become it.
To offer a few reflections on the practice of meditation, offered in a spirit of humility and awareness of one's lack of authority here. Meditation is not an intellectual exercise per se. We do not need to have a PhD, be well read, speak many foreign languages, memorize extensive tracts to practice meditation. Essentially, it is something you must figure out for yourself. It is very private. And the guidelines we get from respected sources like Patanjali's yoga aphorisms or the recommendations in the Gita and the voice of the silence are invaluable. Fundamentally, you must figure it out for yourself. Why? Because it is essentially a dialogue with oneself. It is wise to pick an appointed time for meditation and turning inwards. It helps to set up a habit, positive skandha, if you will, in favor of a daily exercise. It is helpful to find a quiet, undisturbed place if you can. If not, just make do. If you close your eyes and use your imagination, you might as well be in a cave in the Himalayas as in some subway in the city. It is good to sit up straight to help prevent drowsiness that can lead to falling asleep. But it does not require sitting in certain positions, incense or candles or anything external. They can help, I suppose, but the real postures are within. There is a takeoff and a landing problem with meditation. Liftoff is getting sufficient critical distance from the persona. The man in the world, the personality, vibrates at one rate, but the man within is humming to a deeper rhythm, a profounder melody. When we shift our attention to our higher nature, there is calmness, centeredness, and detachment. We move in this direction with concentrated imagination. Remember A.E.'s words, we imagine ourselves into its vastness. Landing should also be systematic. We re-enter into time and space in a way that's gradual so that we might retain some of this critical distance and hang on to the aroma of this vasty quietude we're reaching up to. If we think of meditation in devotional terms, then we might call it a follow your heart enterprise. It could be thought of as an act of thankfulness and gratitude. My own maternal grandmother started her day by counting her blessings. She was a very cheerful person, despite being a child of the Great Depression. Gratitude is a form of meditation. When we read from devotional text to help in elevating our spirit, like the Gita or the Tao or the Sermon on the Mount, imaginatively, we can assume that it is our higher self speaking to us through the auspices of the manas, the man in the middle.
From the voice of the silence. Silence thy thoughts, fix thy whole attention on thy master, whom yet thou dost not see, but whom thou feelest. Fix thy soul's gaze upon the star, whose ray thou art, the flaming star that shines within the lightless depths of ever-being, the boundless fields of the unknown. Thou hast to saturate thyself with pure alaya, become as one with nature's soul thought. At one with it, thou art invincible. In separation, thou becomest the playground of samvritti, origin of all the world's delusions. The light from the one master, the one unfading golden light of spirit, shoots its effulgent beams on the disciple from the very first. Its rays thread through the thick, dark clouds of matter. Shun ignorance and likewise shun illusion. Avert thy face from world deceptions. Mistrust thy senses, they are false. But within thy body, the shrine of thy sensations, seek the impersonal for the eternal man. And having sought him out, look inward. Thou art Buddha.
What more does one need? Moving our attention now to self-study. Self-study is not merely understanding what makes the personality tick. We need to discover everything we can about manas, the mind, both the high and the low, the noble and the mean, the selfish and the altruistic. And self-study includes the effort to grasp the idea of what stands behind and above the mind, the pure self, completely free of all tethers. A good exercise in this direction is to put oneself in the place of others. Learn to see life through the eyes of one's fellow man. From these baby steps, we can progressively work up to seeing life through the eyes of humanity as a whole. This is precisely what the compassionate Mahatmas can do. Self-study concerning the personality is really tough. Without the perspective gained from critical distance, it is impossible to untie the knots of the ego. Every effort should be made to start the process from the mental posture of the perceiver, the witness, the sutratman. The ego cannot evaluate the ego. It is self-serving by nature. We have to elevate to see clearly and dispassionately. The personality is not interested in being evaluated critically. It would prefer to evaluate the weaknesses of others instead. If you listen to just about any televangelist, this pervasive human tendency to judge others will be on full display. It is obfuscation. The ego is not real. It has an expiration date. It is a cluster of habits, likes and dislikes, desires and aversions. The problem is the lower mind, with its attention buried in the senses, has stamped the letter I on this cluster of tendencies. The object of self-study of this sort is not to condemn, but instead to correct. If the climber starts to lose a hold on the wall, there is no time for a pity party. An adjustment must be made, coolly and decisively. The trait of the self-protective ego is to deflect. It wants to edit out what is uncomplimentary. The immortal soul needs the unedited version of what is going on. The personality is something we use. It's something that we are endlessly improving to help us perform our duties. The personality is the clay we are molding and not the self. The individuality, the immortal soul, is the craftsman.
From the key to Theosophy, I have given you once already a familiar illustration by comparing the ego or the individuality to an actor and its numerous and various incarnation to the parts it plays. Will you call these parts or their costumes the individuality of the actor himself? Like that actor, the ego is forced to play during the cycle of necessity, up to the very threshold of parinirvana, many parts such as may be unpleasant to it.
So in this passage from the key, ego here is the higher ego, the individuality that HBB is talking about. We know we are making progress in critical distance when we begin to stop taking ourselves so seriously. The antics of the ego mind might just become hilarious when viewed from a higher perspective.
Thoreau from Walden. We must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake, not by mechanical aids, but by an infinite expectation of the dawn, which does not forsake us in our soundest sleep. I know of no more encouraging fact than the unquestionable ability of man to elevate his life by a conscious endeavor. It is something to be able to paint a particular picture or to carve a statue, and so to make a few objects beautiful. But it is far more glorious to carve and paint the very atmosphere and medium through which we look, which morally we cannot do, which we can do, to affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts. Every man is tasked to make his life, even in its details, worthy of the contemplation of his most elevated and critical hour.
We are told that our experiments in meditation are only fumbling attempts at building a line of life's meditation. These efforts are preparations for a time far, far down the road when enough continuity of consciousness is established, signaling our readiness for the trials of discipleship. These are trials distantly reflected in the challenging free solo climb of El Capitan. There's also a line of life lessons to be obtained through our fumbling attempts at self-study. What are the overarching karmic lessons of this lifetime? We must answer these questions for ourselves. The line of life's meditation and the line of life's lessons naturally lead us to the line of life's obligations. What is it that I am here to do? What contributions can I make to the pilgrimage of the human family? And of equal importance, of how can I assist the people I find amongst myself? There is a macro and a micro perspective to meditation and self-study. Mental health in our times has reached a crisis point. The prevailing ideas of our society with the worship of the persona, the one life doctrine, the me first attitude, and body identification have crippled the psyche of contemporary man. It has led to fragmentation of consciousness. There is a COVID pandemic of the mind. Our ideas are too small. They do not allow us to breathe. We are suffocating on crippled ideas about God, nature, and man. Contemporary notions provide little oxygen. Modern man has lost his soul precisely because he has forgotten that he is a soul.
From the voice of the silence. Learn above all to separate head learning from soul wisdom, the I from the heart doctrine. Yeah, ignorance is like unto a closed and airless vessel, the soul a bird shut up within. It warbles not, nor can it stir a feather, but the songster mute and torpid sits, and of exhaustion dies. But even ignorance is better than head learning with no soul wisdom to illuminate and guide it. The seeds of wisdom cannot sprout and grow in airless space. To live and reap experience, the mind needs breadth and depth and points to draw it towards the diamond soul. Seek not those points in Maya's realm, but soar beyond illusions. Search the eternal and the changeless Sat, mistrusting fancies, false suggestions. For mind is like a mirror. It gathers dust while it reflects. It needs the gentle breezes of soul wisdom to brush away the dust of our illusions. Seek, O beginner, to blend thy mind and soul.
And it is important to remember that everyone is struggling with something, even those who appear to have all their ducks in a row. It is an illusion to think that any one of us is special. Lao Tzu said, "The sage has no self of his own. He makes the self of others his own." We are one family, and compassion flows from this awareness. So we have to buck up and embrace the challenges like the mountain climbers of El Capitan. Continuity of consciousness is an awareness of the continuity of life. It is a dancing to the music of the spheres. Continuity of consciousness is just another way of saying persistence in practice. It is the practice of lifting our spirits. It is the practice of lifting the spirits of others. In this endeavor, we need soul wisdom. And ironically, despite all our feelings of weakness and emptiness, we are swimming in a sea of soul wisdom. The cosmos is grand enough. The universe magnificent enough. Nature beautiful enough. And human nature noble enough to warm any heart and expand any mind. This is the promise of Theosophy.
From Bhavani Shankar. Just as food is necessary for sustaining physical life, even so, meditation and worship are needed for keeping up the spiritual life. The physical man must be made more ethereal by taking pure food. Moral man more self-denying and philosophical. Mental man more penetrating and profound. And spiritual man more devotional.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jerry. I think I speak on behalf of everyone here that,
and Prima.
Yes, I was going to get to that. But I think you did us a very great service today. As only a longtime student of Theosophy and someone who's very concerned about meditation could do, you wove together a garland of so many apt quotations that shows years of careful study, and you wove it together in such a clear way. I hope that this talk you gave today can be made available in the future for people who may not have been able to be here today. And a special thanks to Prima for such an elevated and clear reading of all those quotations, very heartfelt. It was really a wonderful experience and a great reminder and encouragement for me, for sure. And so we have now plenty of time for discussion, for your comments and questions. And I just ask again that you do watch your muting so that any ambient noise doesn't step on the voices of other people. Does anybody want to start?
I have a question.
Please, Jonathan.
I noticed that those rock climbers didn't look down. Could you talk about that?
They do look down.
Okay.
In fact, they look down a lot. In the interviews that I listened to that of Alex's climbing, he makes the point that when he does these ascents, there's sections that are incredibly difficult, some that are casually difficult, and some that are easy. And what he tends to do is he will move into a place where he's safe and then take in the view. I mean, the whole point of being up there is the perspective. He loves being in that elevated place, but he realizes that when he's doing something exceedingly difficult, he has to bring his entire attention to it. And that's his superpower, this ability to be so calm and so focused. It's really important to remember he's doing this without any protection. There's no room for mistakes. And he took up free soloing, which he does very, very rarely. He had done 1,000 free solo attempts on less difficult climbs all around the world, but particularly in Yosemite Valley, 1,000 of them, most of them without anyone knowing he was doing it, with no fanfare, with no one watching. Just later on, he would mention to a friend of his that he had climbed Half Dome without a rope. So his idea was, and the reason I got into doing free soloing was that he wanted to test himself on the mastery of his climbing ability. And so he would go through and climb a particular climb dozens of times, rehearsing it again and again and again and again and again, till he felt like he had a certain mastery of it. And then he would test himself with the free solo. And the ascent of El Capitan, which is this 3,000-foot climb. No one had ever dreamed of doing that without any protection. It was out of the realm of even possibility for the top 5 climbers on the planet. So this is why in our own lifetimes, there's a human being that's done something so remarkable that I think is reminiscent of what we in Theosophy feel is the power of the mind. The mind has incredible powers that we don't tap. And here's an example of an individual who has trained himself to not only focus at that level of focus, but also to systematically overcome the natural fear that any human being would feel in those heights. And he said that he did this incrementally. Like he would get to a point where this fear would arise, and then he would push himself just a little bit beyond it until that next level of fear was mastered. And then he'd push a little further and a little further. So he's a wonderful character study, I think. And it has a lot of parallels with meditation, I think.
Thank you.
Jerry, I have a question. At the beginning of the presentation, you pointed out sort of 2 dimensions of continuity, that there is sort of this kind of ontological dimension where anything in the universe is ultimately connected in one single network. So the poppy blowing on the mountainside is related to a distant galaxy. And you encouraged us to see those links and to feel those links. And then at the same time, there's this notion of continuity of consciousness through continuity of will, persistence. You emphasize that. Are these 2 dimensions related? Was that part of your point, that my persistence will be more fruitful or more successful if I can see the link between the firefly and the galaxy?
Well, that might be a good question to open up to everyone. But I'll start our discussion off on that with, I think the Theosophical perspective is to try to see things as a whole. That's the overriding idea. I mean, we start off with the brotherhood and sisterhood idea, right? That we're one family. That's kind of our ethical imperative. But seeing life as a whole, not freezing it into little pieces and sections like Emerson said in the reading that Prima gave us. Essentially, we're trying to become more like the cosmos and the universe. We're trying to miniaturize that. That's the universalization of the individual, is to become more whole. The self within, the soul within, as Emerson says, is a representative of the whole. Problem is that we've got everything all broken into little pieces. So trying to see time as continuous, seeing the being as continuous, I think is part of the discipline of just again and again and again trying to see what's behind, the connection behind things. But I'm sure other people have thoughts about this question too. It's a really good question.
Don't all jump in at once.
Prima, would you like to add something to this?
I think you have pretty well covered the many areas that we discussed today, the oneness of it all. I think you have.
I might just say, because you got me thinking about this, that the personality, the sort of the predatory separative personality preys on the illusion, or is nourished on the illusion of separation. And I mean, for example, just obvious the defect of hypocrisy, that we think we can do one thing with the left hand and the right hand won't know, or we can hide something, while we give lip service to something else. That's assuming there's some kind of separation. And it seems like the more we undermine that with that separation with reason and with analogy and with thinking it through, the more that incites us towards effort. So I think there is a connection between my degree of summoning effort in moral endeavor or in concentration endeavor and my kind of ontological view that it's all connected. There's no place to hide. There's no the law of karma rules everything. There's no way of getting out of it. The more I think we surrender those illusions that there's a place to hide or we can get away with it, the more we summon some kind of force of truth to purify and to unify. Anyway, my thought on it.
Mm-hmm. Francis, what are you thinking? I know you're thinking.
Well, okay, I succeeded in unmuting me. Well, I think that in your presentation there were so many related, brilliant points that it's hard not to connect them with each other. There was one about, I think you were saying that, Jerry, about the meditation and the inward, and I'm paraphrasing, but the inward march towards infinity, becoming it. So pure consciousness. And if we are to think about it, is the experience of pure consciousness, the experience of infinity, is it something pleasant or unpleasant? I will keep that as a question for now. But it takes me to concentration that you spoke about at the beginning. And if you think about concentration, if you use concentration as a tool, you end up having whatever your mind is, whatever state you have, there is noise, and there is what still allows you to focus on whatever you want to focus on to. That noise, through concentration, if you want to suppress it, means effort of the mind. Now, let's say you can suppress it, you still have effort going on, and therefore your mind is not entirely available for whatever it has more or less discovered, more or less it has been able to focus on. So what is the key? The key would be, I'm suggesting, that experience of pure consciousness and boundedness. And yes, the answer is that it's extremely pleasant to the mind because it has no boundaries. If that is the case, then you can concentrate naturally without effort. And if it is without effort, you could probably call it focus. You want to focus on whatever you want to focus on is achievable because your mind is free. Your mind is unbounded. So in other things that you said, you were speaking about the critical distance. Obviously, if you're within the noise, then no. If you can step back from it, you have that critical distance. Now, what would it mean when someone experiences pure consciousness? That experience that is beyond the relative, that is beyond the noise, is permanent. And critical distance is permanent, which allows the mind to focus on anything whatsoever. Experiencing pure bliss consciousness, the mind can do anything he wants. Now, including devotion. If we think, because you spoke about devotion, if you think of devotion as being one of the things you'll be focusing on and you'll be benefiting from immensely, what amount of devotion can an individual who's cluttered with noise and anxiety and all that, what type of devotion can that person offer to himself or herself? Less noise, more bliss will allow that person to experience as much devotion as possible and benefit from it. Those are the little pieces I've been putting together. I would say probably my conclusion on that would be if one can be rooted, really rooted in the infinite, can freely experience any aspect of the finite, can freely experience any aspect of the manifest world. I spoke too much.
No, but you brought to light a new thought for me, that devotion itself is by nature concentration. To be devoted to something means to give one's whole heart to something, which in and of itself is a form of concentration. But I think Pierre was about to say something and I cut him off. Go ahead, Pierre.
Oh, you can finish your thought, Jerry.
No, that's what I wanted to say.
Okay. Well, what I wanted to bring up is that, first of all, is the question, why would we meditate in the first place? And meditation itself, the word, is something that covers a very broad field nowadays in our society. And so the first thing, if such a concept as meditation comes up, then we have to ask ourselves, what is the purpose? And what are the tools that I need? Where do I need to get? What is the top of El Capitan? And so in a certain sense, we have to develop a kind of map, which is what Alex did too. He mapped out the whole trip. And then the question is, well, what is that actually, that map? I think a lot of people go into meditation thinking that they have to focus on a light or just one single thought. But it may very well be that the starting point is actually a very broad basis of the mountain, so to speak, because the mountain usually leads to a peak. So what are the tools then that we can use before we start meditating to cover the map, so to speak, or draw the map? Because we start to look for something that the result of which is going to be totally beyond our understanding from the perspective where we're starting. The problem is that where we're starting, we don't know that either, because we're totally immersed in illusion. So how do we go about this? How do we develop tools?
Yeah, that's a good question for the group. Let's hear what other people have to say about that. It's a great question.
Would one possible concept would be to not formulate hard goals, and almost anything that we participate in, we're thinking in terms of goal. I'm walking to the store, or I'm going to do push-ups and get strong. But with meditation, and this devotion, would it be much more subtle? And should we, well, that's a question. Then how will we recognize, quote, success, unquote? How will we, should we set goals, or do we just let it take its place, assuming that the benefits, all these words are not right. I don't have a vocabulary for it, but the benefits are not things that we normally would assume to be benefits. How do we gauge success or non-success, or should we even do that?
Well, that's a good point, Alan, but you could say, should we set a goal or not? Well, you can be swerving along the mountain, of course. But it's better to set a goal, even if you don't really know where that will end you. But I think it's important that before we even take off, that we try to understand what our problems are in order to ascend the mountain, so to speak, the mountain of meditation. Because otherwise we drag all our misconceptions into that field of meditation. So maybe introspection there, which you can also call an aspect of meditation, of course. But I think that introspection there is a very important point. What are my limitations before I take off? If say you're an athlete and in 4 years' time you need to go to the Olympics, you do not start training the week before, hopefully. You already started training years and years ahead. Isn't that what we should do as well? Developing our tools and our capacities before we even dive into that journey?
Yes, and it hasn't we want this meditation to well, my goal is up. My goal is higher, and I can't put too much beyond that. So you're saying that we should have more specific goals instead of I'll do what I'm instructed to do in meditation and see where it takes me. We need to be more specific than that. Is that what do you believe? Do we need to be more specific, or do we just sort of disengage our mind and try and reduce the sensory input and think in terms of the physical illusion and just see where that takes us?
That could be already part of developing the tools, of course. I'm not excluding anything here. I'm just trying to figure out that I shouldn't forget anything before I take off.
I think Ava has a comment. I wonder if she would speak up.
Yes, I was just wondering that before starting on any journey, I think it would be wise to look into the motives. So I think that the motive for why we're doing this may also be of crucial importance.
I wonder where pain comes in on this. Don't we have to experience a certain degree of dissatisfaction before we want to make a change? I mean, don't we have to see that, get some sense that our lack of mental control is making us dysfunctional, is harming our relationships, is obscuring our sense of duty or purpose? You know, it seems to me, until we see that the ordinary life on personal terms is an unsatisfactory life, we don't have motivation for beginning to ask, is there another way?
I think that's a good point, Joe. I think part of the tool box is to get over that the failure that we each time meet when reaching for focusing, for instance. If you have to focus on A, that's one of the things I find difficult in meditation, is that you focus on A, and I'm not saying that's a particular single thing, and all of a sudden I find myself in B, and I didn't see the flip from one to the other. I find that one of the most difficult things in meditation. So there's a predicament there. I can't catch that transition from moving away from where I wanted to stay. All of a sudden I find myself in B, and I go, oh, that's not where I was going. How do we catch that moment? Is there a solution to that problem? I find that one of the most difficult things.
I think Sri is waiting to speak too.
Yeah, I just want to respond to Pierre there. Pierre, you might be able to tell us more on this, that I think Patanjali has given what you call a roadmap, hasn't he? His Ashtanga Yoga, the 8 steps.
Yeah.
What do you think of that? Do you think that would set you on the direction to meditation? Because I think meditation in the end is a state in which you forget yourself. You forget you're a different self, a small self, if you want to call it. And for at least a few moments, you're one with nature, whatever there is. And there's no distinction between yourself and the rest. Is that right? Do you think that makes sense?
I think it definitely makes sense, except that it doesn't solve my problem. Because I agree that Patanjali is definitely gives us a roadmap, and HPB points out also to be careful with Patanjali, because a lot of it, she says, is actually, I wouldn't say necessarily exoteric, but there's more hidden than what it shows. But even when I read through Patanjali and I read what needs to be done, the actual doing, like focusing on a certain thing, and all of a sudden I find myself unfocused. And the moment I realize that is when it's too late. So how do I stay in that focus? Why is that? Why can't I maintain that original focus? Francis has the answer to it, or Monica.
Well, I think Anna has been waiting to. Do you see her there, Joe?
Yes, Anna, you're muted.
I think this the motive, as Eva speaks about, is very important when it comes to switching from one place to another in meditation. If you have a greater picture and especially association with the motive, I think it's harder to switch from A to B. And I think it's especially the association with the motive that needs to be very strong.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I wonder, connecting that, I wonder if when I hear Pierre voice that problem, I think of the problem as one of vigilance. And you can imagine some night watchman that is working through sort of a low resolution video, so that only takes a frame every 5 seconds or something, and somehow between the sampling of those frames, the area where he's watching the prowler gets in. The answer would be, well, we need to take more frame samples. We need to be vigilant. We need to be at a high vibration in a way. Is it an intensity of vigilance that's needed, and would that be connected with the motive that Anna's talking about?
I'd like to add something to that, Joe. This exercise that we're talking about, this, if we want to call it that, it's a turning inward, right? It's turning consciousness back upon itself. So we wouldn't engage in this if it weren't an adventure, if it weren't something of exploration. There's an element of exploration. We're operating, kind of a little bit in a cloud, and we want to rise above the clouds and see further. So you can't predetermine what it is you're going to see. You just know that you need to elevate. So I don't know that I'm addressing Pierre's question at all, actually, but I think that that's why the mountain climbing metaphor made a lot of sense to me, because it seems to me, at least in my own experiences, that the efforts at meditation had this exploratory element to it.
Thank you, and that sort of picks up on Alan's point. I think Francis is next.
Thank you. If you saw me smile, Pierre, I was not making fun of what you were saying. I was.
You can make fun of me, I don't mind.
I was so thrilled with your way of putting it in words and expressing what so many meditators, whatever method they use, experience. They say, oh, I jumped from A to B. You were wondering, is there a way I could be aware of it? Maybe what you meant is that if I'm aware of it, I'm going to keep it from happening. I think it would be fighting against one of the most powerful forces in nature, which is our mind goes towards something which is more pleasant, no matter what. If the meditation technique allows your mind to experience increasing pleasantness, I should say, towards bliss, then the mind automatically stays focused on it, and there is no way the mind is going to diverge. Think of a small kid in front of his mother, 10 meters from it. And the closer he is from his mother, the faster he runs and crashes on his mother. That's the way the mind works. If the technique is right, the mind automatically marches towards infinity, totally ignoring A, B, or C. Whichever way it happens, however noisy it could be at the beginning, but progressively, the mind goes there because the mind knows. I'm saying the mind's a large way of saying it, but that's our nature. That's our nature. If this is not in front of us, we diverge automatically. No way. There is no way to stop it.
Francis, what if I'm, decide I'm focusing on universal good, or I'm focusing on gratitude, the current of gratitude Jerry's talking about, it certainly has a pleasant appeal. I feel myself getting enveloped in the aroma of it. And then I remember the new car that I've on order, and it's finally going to be delivered next week to the dealership. And I just go right to that because it's, I don't know, it's also pleasant, and it seems more pleasant at the moment.
Yeah. So it's a matter of competition. Which is most pleasant? What is the most pleasant, and not just thought, in fact, experience that I can offer through my meditation technique to the mind. If it is good, then the mind goes towards it. It makes me, I don't know, well, I have another point, so maybe I should not mix them.
I think Jonathan's been waiting to make a comment here too. Let's hear from Jonathan.
Oh, okay, thank you. Regarding concentration, I'm still going back to those rock climbers here. Can't get them out of my mind, Jerry.
Me too.
I want to talk about the high stakes element of it. It's not just with those guys and men and women. It's not just, oops, I fell. This is a virtual computer thing. I can reset the computer. The stakes are extremely high. So what about that? And I was thinking that with reference to concentration, if a parent is holding the hands of a little child getting across the street, maybe kind of a bigger, more dangerous street, the stakes are high, right? If there's an airline pilot, concentration, stakes are high, right? And notice how the common theme there is that there's a family around oneself that one has to take care of. So I was wondering if there's anything like that with meditation, because there's in the chat session, and also what Eva mentioned, motive seems to be so key. So in other words, is there something about meditation and gaining this higher perspective where the stakes really are high on behalf of others, or at least could be?
Let me respond to that, if you'll let me, Joe. That's a really good question, really important question. I forgot who the writer is that said this, but there's the idea that everything is far more important than we think it is, and at the same time, it's never as important as you think it is. That both of those things are true at the same time.
Samuel Butler's Notebooks.
Thank you. So we do know theosophically that every single moment of every single waking moment, we are impressing life atoms. We are emitting a vibration. We are affecting our environment. We're affecting our fellow man. We're either lifting or dragging down life in general and those around us. The stakes are high. They're really high. But if we ran around with this Atlas complex and totally terrified of making a mistake, Krishna would admonish us. He'd say, you have to act. The tendency would want to be to just go hide in a cave someplace so you don't make a mistake. But we have to act. Why? Because we have obligations to each other. And I think this goes back to the question that Pierre is asking, this map question. The missing ingredient in meditation and pop culture is there's no philosophy behind it. There's no overarching philosophy. And it goes back to Anna's point. The motive is not going to be pure, or the attempt to purify the motive, which is what self-study is about, unless there's an overriding philosophy to drive that. So we take the example, for instance, of the Buddha in his life. his journey, his spiritual journey, was motivated out of compassion. It wasn't out of self-help. It wasn't to feel better. It wasn't to get over some illness. It wasn't to be happy. None of that. The Buddha's motivation was a genuine concern for the suffering of humanity. So without really having an overarching philosophy, meditation and self-study don't have strong enough roots. And so I think that when we start thinking along those lines, then the consequence, Alex Honnold loves to talk about consequence. Like the things he does for us seem impossible, but for him, he's totally confident he's safe. He says he feels safer on the mountain than he does driving down the freeway with all these crazy drivers all around him. He's in total control. So I think that trying to give each moment a higher level of seriousness and consequence has to be coupled with kind of forgetting oneself and well, this is where the Gita comes in, doesn't it? Renunciation, the fruit of action. You just do the best you can. Do the best you can. But you need to be mindful at the same time. The letting go and the management of the mind, the directional, the need to choose, to make choices. It's said that the sage chooses every single thought. Those two have to be brought together. And that becomes kind of a dialectic, if you will. It's a systole and diastole of the heart. The letting go, but focusing, and bring the two together. It's mysterious.
Excellent answer, Jerry. We're running short on time. I do want to get to a couple other hands that are raised. Shri, you're next.
Yeah, I just want to get back to Pierre's question and suggest that if you follow Patanjali on, preparing yourself and concentration and absorption, when you're really absorbed in something, doing anything, painting a wall, for example, if you're totally absorbed, isn't that meditation? Or you're reading a book and you don't know that time flies 4 hours. You're totally absorbed in the book. Isn't that a form of meditation?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Anna, you're next.
Yeah, I was sitting here thinking also, if I compare with the mountain climbers, I think it's important also with the technique. If you, I'm training karate, and whenever I'm about to do a kata, we cut it down in small pieces, and then we do it over and over and over again, and sometimes we even do it in our minds before. And in that way, we get very mindful about every single movement and every single, when you climb, I don't know, hand movement maybe. And I think that's, except for the association with, of course, coming to the top, and that, I think technique is very important.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Rehearsal, breaking it down, and internalizing it. Ray, you're next. Ray, are you still there? Do you have a comment still? Your hand is up.
Yes, thank you. I'm moving all around the screen trying to catch the chats so that they'll be available when I finish. Pictures of all your lovely faces so I know who's talking, because I at least can get that when you don't show it any other time. First of all, let me thank you. And what I wanted to ask very briefly is it possible for at least someone to stay after to answer other questions or comments? I just want this to continue. That's why I've never spoken during any part of it. It's too rich for me to try to even say anything. And I just want to hear you exhaust yourselves in question and answer. And I'm willing to give up dinner and tomorrow morning breakfast if you can do it. That was all. And I do have a couple of quick comments that I hope are worthy of the discussion that has gone on here. First of all, someone was talking about goals. It's very important to have some kind of organizing map in your mind, and there are as many ways of that happening as there are people. One of them is that vision, goals, strategies, tactics, and tools are made up of the things that have to do with technicians, their techniques, and then all the physical things that are existing in the world are just literally the bottom level of tools. So we get hung up on money, and really that is a confusion of vision, thinking that it is a vision. You know, if I just have enough money, that's inspiring me. Or actually, it's just a tool that you're connected to. And anyway, and Gandhi put this very well. He said that God, I know this so well. Whenever I get excited, I lose my memory. I'm out of my mind.
What's the gist of it?
God dare not come to the starving man except in the form of food.
Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah.
And I'm sure any of you that read Gandhi will remember that. Joe, Anna talked about motive. It's interesting because what we're trying to do is learn about meditation, it seems to me. All of us are. And that was, it seems to me, the theme that was inspiring in this. And if we get, and knowing what motivation is psychologically is really important. Vigilance was connected to it. And then we start going down a slippery slope of not being able to distinguish between our language. HPB said that language, words are really important, and they are actually they're carriers for us. So this is just to emphasize that. Jonathan's comment about the stakes being very high, I would agree. And actually the highest stake is that it's our life, and this visual connection that you made tonight. I'm thinking about the rest of you. This afternoon is with these pictures and all was spectacular. And I'm trying to get through this as quick as I can. Oh, consequences in meditation. The use of the word meditation really gets cleared up quickly if you're looking at the structure of it in Patanjali yoga aphorisms, or picking a good critical analysis of it, such as Taimni's science of yoga. And that's all. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Ray. And I really appreciate your enthusiasm too. I feel the same way about this afternoon. We are past time, so I do want to invite, anyone who feels like you've got another commitment and you have to go, don't feel like it's rude to check out. I think we're willing to stay online here to continue the energy. I certainly have no deadline right now, and I think Jerry's willing to stay on as well. Monica, you're next.
Thank you. I just wanted to first say this was magnificent, just magnificent. I felt that the entire thing, with the flow and the input from all the different readings, was in itself a meditation. Yeah. And so thank you so much for that. There are a couple of things that I wanted to respond to that I believe Francis and Jerry touched on, about this idea of finding oneself having wandered away from the focus. And I wanted to add, if I may, this idea of loving kindness and being non-judgmental in the way we bring ourselves away from that place where we've strayed to in this effort in meditation. And I think that this is important because, as Jerry said, that we're always radiating something and everything builds upon itself. And this being true, as we take the attitude of chastisement, however unconsciously, for having steered away from the goal, we too, in those moments, are building something up. So if we can be mindful enough to remember to bring the mind back gently and lovingly, without judgment, from where it should not be back to where you want it to be, this too builds up something for the ego to latch onto. It's something that the ego enjoys, being totally accepted without judgment. And the other thing is the quality of courage that the climbers give us the analogy of. If we can somehow infuse or message to the lower mind how courageous it is to take this on, then that subtle, that sense, whatever sense of rebellion that might be there, however subtle, I believe is lessened by that and this loving kindness and this non-judgment of, hey, you're not supposed to be over here, you're supposed to be over here. If we can do that in a way to the mind that transmits the idea, not only are you courageous, but what a beautiful thing that you're involved in here, come back. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Monica. That's a really important point. I feel like we could have a whole afternoon on the fault of self-shaming and its ineffectiveness. Very, 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 very well said. Thank you.
You
Anna?
made my day, Monica. You made my day.
Anna, you another comment? Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking about this first comment also. Do they ever look down? And I was thinking that maybe every small lower detail, there's a way of turning it around into something positive, or a greater motive. And so on every level, I think we need to remember that you can always change the stakes.
So Anna, if you were literally climbing and you look down, you would try to, yeah.
The positive sides with the lower realms too.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Very good. One of the things we that could get talked about next week and the week after too is it's just a little thought, and we don't have to go into it now, but in the Tibetan, in the Mahayana tradition, they have the image of the bird soaring, and the state of uninterrupted meditation is like the soaring bird that doesn't need to flap at all. But there comes a necessity sometimes for readjusting the flight, and when a soaring bird needs to, it flaps just enough to put it in a position where it can be in that serene state of non-movement again. And I think I was going back to my analogy about, perhaps it's a true story, about being distracted by the new car. But I think the thing that what it brings up to me is when a distraction like that occurs, one then it's a time to flap. That is, one brings in the analytic or questioning mind, sees the way that one assigns false or exaggerated value to whatever is drawing the mind away, and therefore takes, lowers the temperature of that. As often it's asserting an antidote, so one can see that, in only a few years, that car will be in the junk pile, it'll be rusted, it may get broken, I certainly will lose interest in it in a week and a half. So all of that can lower the temperature, and then the draw of whatever it was, gratitude, can reassert itself, and perhaps I can find an undistracted state again.
So Joe, if you don't mind, let me make a last statement before we close our meeting. I think we've gone on long enough, probably. If no one would say to you, here's the technique for listening to music, or here's the technique for loving your mother. There's an element to this topic that transcends technique. And I think there's all too often people are looking for shortcuts. They're looking for some rapid way to, like that cartoon I showed, like, when's this peace of mind going to happen? This is the part of ourselves that we have to master. That's the part of ourselves that needs to be quieted in favor of that. I like that idea of the meditating man in the middle from the Hermes article. Because there is this in-between place between that beyond and this place I'm stuck in that I can go to, that helps me transition. It's important. So I think it's really, this topic, as we explore it over the next couple of weeks, and we have two wonderful speakers who are incredibly insightful people that I'm anxious to hear from. We just need not to lose track of the fact that it's the spirit of it that's most important, not the technique.
That's a very good point. I want to again thank you, Jerry, for what you've given us today. Really, I mean, I can see by all the excitement and the incredibly intelligent comments that you really struck the bell here. And and it's also just your eloquence, your own delivery reminded me of Alex Honnold's handheld hold, because a patient delivery, a kind tone of voice. Anyway, very, very grateful to you for what you've given us today. And I just want to remind everyone, again, next week, a very interesting topic: spiritual science for an inner telescope. And the following week will be meditation and self-healing.
And Jonathan's group has a lecture later on today. Jonathan, do you want to tell us that real quickly?
Sure. The Aquarian series, it'll be the rediscovery of America. So we're going to try and fix the wobbly ship called America.
Well, stabilizing the mind is the first step to stabilizing the nation.
Thank you. Good idea.
And thank you, Joe.
My pleasure. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Good night, all. Good day, all.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Bye-bye.
Fantastic, Jerry. Goodbye.